On September 11, 2025, northwest Trinidad, including the capital, Port of Spain, was struck by flash floods that paralyzed community activities and exposed structural vulnerabilities in the spatial planning and hydrometeorological risk management system. The torrential rain, which lasted for nearly 4 hours, caused extreme flooding on major roads, landslides in hilly areas, and significant disruption to public mobility. This event was not simply a weather event, but a reflection of a system that was not fully prepared for the intensification of the tropical climate and uncontrolled urbanization. According to a report in the Trinidad Guardian, the rain began around 2 a.m. and peaked around sunrise. Rainfall recorded between 2 and 6 inches in less than 12 hours, with peak rates reaching 200 millimeters per hour in Woodbrook, a rate classified as extreme by international meteorological standards. This rain was part of a weather pattern that had been in place since late August, driven by convergence of winds in the lower atmosphere and conditions aloft that were highly conducive to thunderstorm formation. Although the Intertropical Convergence Zone, ITCZ, is still technically south of Trinidad, analysis from the National Hurricane Center and Barbados Meteorological Services indicates that its northward migration has triggered localized hurricane activity. The Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service, TTMS, issued a yellow weather warning on September 9th, which was later upgraded to a Level 3 warning on September 11th, marking the potential official start of the 2025 rainy season. Flooding affected densely populated areas and centers of economic activity. In Port of Spain, South Quay and Independence Square became impassable. The city gate terminal was completely paralyzed, forcing hundreds of residents to seek temporary shelter in bus stops, shops, and public buildings. Private vehicles were stuck in traffic jams that lasted into the evening, while public transportation services were temporarily suspended. In Maryville, flooding occurred in Boissier Village and Maryville Plaza, disrupting access to public facilities and causing damage to residents' properties. In Woodbrook, flooding affected strategic points such as Colville Street and Ariapita Avenue, while Wrightson Road was submerged around French Street and Fitz Street. On Lady Young Road, flooding near the Belmont Police Station Bridge exacerbated traffic congestion and cut off alternative access routes out of town. In Diego Martin, days of rain caused landslides on Union Road, damaging residential access and increasing the risk of slope instability. The Ministry of Works and local government identified vulnerable areas and urged residents to avoid flooded areas. An emergency hotline was opened, but information distribution remained fragmented and uneven. The National Disaster Management Organization, ODPM, issued weather warnings and activated emergency response units in various districts. However, many residents felt they lacked sufficient time to prepare due to the sudden increase in rain in the early hours of the morning. Some stated that the warnings did not reach all communities, especially those living in hilly and coastal areas. The Ministry of Works and Infrastructure issued a press release identifying affected areas and urging residents to avoid flood-prone areas. The government also activated river monitoring teams, with data indicating that the Caroni and Cunupia rivers had reached more than 70% capacity by 4 p.m. and were expected to overflow ahead of high tide at 9 p.m. The floods exposed structural weaknesses in the city's drainage system and spatial planning. The Cunupia and Caroni rivers overflowed due to incompletely repaired drainage channels, particularly around Hinken and Mon Plaisir roads. Rapid urbanization without mitigation planning exacerbated the impacts of flooding, particularly in low-lying and coastal areas. Many buildings stand on land that was once a natural waterway, impeding flow and accelerating inundation. Reliance on conventional warning systems and minimal public education about climate risks left communities vulnerable to hydrometeorological shocks. The absence of a community-based warning system and the lack of integration between meteorological data and urban planning policies exacerbated the impacts. Furthermore, river and waterway maintenance projects were often delayed or inconsistently implemented, raising questions about the effectiveness of budget allocations and the transparency of implementation. This incident sparked public discussion about the effectiveness of drainage systems and the preparedness of local governments. Residents questioned whether river and canal maintenance projects had been consistently implemented, especially in areas like Hinken and Mon Plaisir roads, which experienced repeated flooding. Many called for infrastructure audits and community participation in the mitigation planning process. Furthermore, the floods also opened up space for deeper social reflection. As floodwaters blocked roads and separated families, spontaneous solidarity emerged among residents. Some communities opened their homes to temporarily accommodate evacuees, while local organizations mobilized emergency aid in the form of food, clean water, and bedding. However, this solidarity cannot replace the need for resilient and responsive systems. The government needs to develop data-driven and participatory climate adaptation policies, including risk mapping, community-based early warning systems, and the development of green infrastructure such as infiltration parks and multifunctional canals. The flash floods that struck Trinidad and Tobago were not simply extreme weather events, but rather a mirror reflecting the complex realities of nature, infrastructure, and public policy. Heavy rainfall triggered by atmospheric convergence and the northward migration of the Intertropical Convergence Zone, ITCZ, revealed the vulnerability of drainage systems and urban planning to the intensifying tropical climate. The impacts were widespread. Major roads were submerged, public transportation was paralyzed, landslides occurred in hilly areas, and thousands of residents were directly affected. The government's response, while swift in the form of warnings and the activation of emergency units, did not fully reach the community. Structural unpreparedness and fragmented communication exacerbated the situation, especially in areas already saturated with water and lacking alternative access. Systemically, these floods highlight the urgent need for a data-driven, participatory, and long-term resilience-oriented climate adaptation policy transformation. Uncontrolled urbanization, development in flood-prone zones, and a lack of green spaces exacerbate risks and diminish communities' capacity to recover. Yet, beneath the inundation and paralysis of the city, there emerged civic solidarity, collective reflection, and a push for change. This flood marks a turning point. Will we continue to react to crises, or will we begin building systems that learn, adapt, and thrive? Trinidad and Tobago now stands at a crossroads between reactive responses and structural reform. The choices we make will determine whether the next flood becomes a repeat tragedy or a lesson that changes the course of the city's history.